I'm Will Coghill-Behrends, and today I'm joined by Dr. Will Liu of the Counseling Psychology Program in our College of Education to talk about research presentations as a part of a campus interview. Will, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Talk to us a little bit about the research presentation. Before somebody leaves campus, what should they be thinking about in terms of perhaps audience or context as they develop their research presentation?
The research presentation, especially for students coming out of a doctoral university and if they're applying to a doctoral program for a job, the research presentation is really their time to shine in front of multiple faculty at another institution. And the big thing that students need to know is that they usually have about an hour, and they need to make sure that they end in an hour. Having the presentation down in terms of timing is very important. The other thing is, even though you might have an hour for a presentation, right off the top, you've got to skim off 15 minutes. 5 minutes for the introduction, 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So you really have an hour presentation minus 15 minutes from that point forward. The other piece is make sure that they practice it. They practice it in front of an audience, and they make sure that they are able to talk about it. Practicing in your head is not good enough. They have to be able to say it. They have to be able to speak it. And on that point, I think students can do two different types of presentations, one of which is they could do a PowerPoint presentation, just talk off the top of their head and present the material. That always gives the prospective faculty in the program a chance to see how they would teach, so that's also important as well. And the other format is some students choose to read a paper, and that's fine as well. And I can talk very quickly about the two different presentations. The first one, the reading a paper. Reading a paper presentation for your research is not about reading your dissertation or reading a research article. You have to write a paper that is understandable to an audience that's only listening to you orally. And so that often means that you have to take out a lot of jargon, and you have to tone it down so that so that when you present it, an audience can understand what you're saying without seeing any visual presentation. And that means you really have to write a separate document. You can't just cut and paste your dissertation. That's ineffective, and you often lose the audience.
Would you maybe say it's essentially a narrative of your research?
A narrative, yes. It's like writing a story. It's actually much more like writing a story than it is a research paper presentation. And the reading of it is much different as well. The cadence of reading a paper, there's a style to it. And what I would encourage students to do is, one of the benefits of being here at the university is they get to go and listen to writers read their writing at places like Prairie Lights or other venues, and listen to them read their stories. And they read it much differently at a much slower cadence than what you would typically speak. And that's partly because you're trying to communicate very complex information, and you have to give the audience the time to assimilate it, understand.
If one chooses this particular format, should they get into things like how I arrived at this research topic, why I chose it? Okay.
Yes, it's a complete narrative from A to Z about why they got into it, why it's important as well. The PowerPoint presentation, you could also do it with the PowerPoint presentation. I think the problem that most students fall into and most professionals fall into is they clearly just put too much on their slides. When I see somebody put too much on their slides, what it says to me is that they are not comfortable presenting, and they're not confident in their presentation. And so they often just end up reading off of their PowerPoint slides. And the problem with that is if you end up short on time, everything on the slide has to be presented. And so to an audience, when you start flipping through the slide very quickly, it's very frustrating. And you don't want employers to be frustrated
Yeah,
about your
absolutely.
research presentation.
So, somebody said once to me that the question and answer portion of a research presentation is actually the most important part.
It is.
What are your thoughts on that?
It is the time in which you are able to speak off the top of your head to the audience members, faculty, students will often throw you questions that are integrative, and you have to think through, how am I going to present this particular answer so that an audience member can understand it and synthesize this material. And like I said, the research presentation is not only about what I want to do with my research, where I want to go with my career, but also how am I going to be in front of a classroom. And so students are there listening to you as well, trying to think, oh, okay, could I see this guy or woman standing in front of me teaching? Do I like how they teach?
Yeah.
And that's often very important. So the research presentation is certainly what you're going to do with your career, but also how you're going to be as a faculty member and as a teacher as well.
How do you handle tough questions? Or, when somebody asks a question and you need to say, shoot, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that. How should you handle that?
I would give myself one I don't know in a Q&A.
All right, very good.
And I would attempt an answer most of the time. Even if you feel like you're off base, you've got to attempt an answer, something like the GRE or SAT. You've got to give it a shot.
Sure.
Give your best shot at trying to answer the question. Even if it's off base, what you're communicating to your audience is, this is how I'm going to think through this question. So even if you don't come up with the right answer, at least you can communicate, this is my logical flow of how I'm arriving to this particular answer. This is how I'm understanding your question. And very seldom, I think, are you thrown a question where you just don't know.
Okay.
You really, I think most of the time you do know, and you've got to attempt that answer.
Sure.
And give it a shot.
What about situating your particular research talk or topic in the context of the host institution?
In what sense?
In terms of, and how this research might fit into this department,
sure.
Is that something that one should, okay.
Yes, I think one of the things that new faculty members applying to a job have to understand is you're often contributing to the life of the program, to the college, to the university as well. How do you fit in? How are you going to contribute to the life of the university? How are you at a public institution or private institution going to reach national prominence? And how are you going to bring the university with you? And that's what they're wondering in the back of their head. And I think how you fit in terms of how your research agenda might bridge across other faculty members is important. Your teaching interests and how that might contribute to what they need and what they want. All of those things are important in terms of communicating your collaboration, potential collaboration, your fit, as well as how you are going to contribite to the ongoing prominence of that institution.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
What about handouts? Some people consider them a distraction. Some people consider them absolutely valuable. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think handouts are, I think I would keep them to a minimum.
Okay.
Most of the information, I think, could be communicated on your PowerPoint slides or whatever material you want to use to as part of your research presentation. I think the thing about what you present, one of the issues that people often lose sight of is everything in your presentation has to function. That's the one thing I've picked up from writers and other individuals I've interacted with who are creative and much more creative than I am. But one of the things that I've learned from them is everything that you say, everything that you present has to have some function. If you're going to put something up on a slide, it has to have some function. You have to present it. So you can't just put up a bunch of material and not cover it. And so on that level, what I would really encourage people to think about is, especially if they're presenting either qualitative or quantitative data, one, qualitative data, don't present the whole quote, however long it is. Pull out this most important sentence that you think highlights the research data that you want to present and isolate that. Don't present a paragraph of information that's it loses the audience because they'll be looking at the slide, they'll be looking at and trying to read while you're talking, and that completely is counter to what you want them to do. That's qualitative. The quantitative piece, I think, students often, or new professionals often get into the problem of presenting all of their data. So a correlation matrix, they'll present everything that they have. And you have to imagine yourself in the seat of an audience member and think, how long does it take for me, if I were to see any data in front of me, how long does it take for me just to orient myself to what's being presented before I even understand what the material is saying to me? And so I've worked with students, and they'll present a whole correlation matrix of 10 or 12 variables. I'll say, that doesn't matter. I want you to present to me the top 3 or 4 correlation coefficients that are the most important. And don't worry about, and this is what it gets to, is you have to trust yourself as a presenter and trust the audience that if they're interested and they ask you about it, you can answer that question.
Sure.
And they aren't going to fault you for not presenting the information.
Right.
They're just going to ask you questions based on what you present. And so often I think students think, oh, but what if they ask me this, and what if I don't have it? They don't know that you're not presenting it. And so you present to them what is the most important piece that helps you track your presentation, and it has a functional element in your presentation, rather than presenting a whole piece saying, look at how much data I have. I think that it's irrelevant to the audience.
Sure. Well, and not to mention, there are other opportunities during the campus visit to
Right.
talk about your research,
Right.
extensions, etc.
Right.
Very good.
Yeah.
Will, you've been great today. Any capstone
Thanks.
advice on research presentations?
I practice oral presentation. Make sure that you practice in front of an audience. Make sure you get some familiarity with Q&A, and make sure you finish on time. That's the important thing.
Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you.